Hello everybody, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at the 2025 elections in Virginia. They're around 2 weeks away. We're getting very close, and we got an interesting poll from State Navigate. This is a state legislature's, kind of organization that has done a lot of work with that kind of thing. And they recently released a poll. It was yesterday afternoon on Virginia, and this to me was a bit of a surprise, mostly because it showed Democrats in a bit better of a position than you might expect them to be in. So we've got a lot to say here. I'm going to get right into it. And we're going to talk about this poll. So just to kind of read off the numbers to you, Spanberger in the race for governor up by 13 over Winsome Earl Sears. Ghazala Hashmi up by 11 over John Reed in the race for lieutenant governor. In the House of Delegates, just the generic ballot there, that's essentially just their state legislature, the one that's up for election this year. Democrats lead by 12 points. To put it in perspective, they only won by a couple of points, the generic ballot there in 2023. And the most surprising result by far from this poll is that Jay Jones is still in the driver's seat in the race for attorney general. I mean, what a race this is. And it was initially expected to be a pretty solid victory for Jay Jones, the Democrat, but some leaked texts right at the beginning of the month, that tied Jay Jones to kind of encouraging political violence and making really, I would say, pretty bad jokes about, harming political opponents, have really thrown this race into a complete, field of chaos, really. This was, again, a race expected to be a pretty solid Democratic gain. Republicans do have an incumbent here, but he wasn't, Jason Miyares, the Republican Attorney General, he wasn't seen as being strong enough to hold on to his seat in a state like Virginia, which voted for Kamala Harris by a full 6 points. And now what we're getting is a race that's pretty close, with some pollsters even showing Jay Jones losing to Miyares now. Now, this poll obviously is not one of them. This poll has a 5-point lead for Jay Jones, which is actually quite solid for him. But some interesting results across the board. We're going to start off in the race for governor because I think that everything is downstream of that. Now, by downstream, what I mean is that the top line for the race for governor is going to impact the other races. Typically, the race at the top of the ticket is the one that gets the most focus and kind of dictates the way that the rest of the state goes. Right, a good example is Pennsylvania last year. Democrats were expected to hold on to the race for Senate, even if Kamala Harris nearly lost to Donald Trump. Kamala Harris lost Pennsylvania by a little more than was expected. If a lot of people thought she was going to win it, first of all, and then the expectation was that if she lost, it would be probably by under 0.7 or 0.8 of a percentage point. She lost it by nearly 2 points, and that resulted in a loss for Democrat Bob Casey in the Senate race by about 0.2 of a percentage point. And so that's just an example of how when you underperform at the top of the ticket, it can really hurt you down the ballot. Democrats also lost 2 House seats in Pennsylvania last year that would be really nice for them to have right about now. So when you look at a state, always start by looking at the race that is most popular. In presidential years, it's going to be the presidential race. In midterm years, it's either the Senate race or the governor's race. This year, it's the race for governor between Abigail Spanberger, the former Democratic Congresswoman, and Winsome Earl Sears, the incumbent Republican lieutenant governor. So what do we have to say here? Well, if we look at the polling data, not necessarily too much of an outlier, although it's certainly one that's a bit stronger for Spanberger than, some other ones, right? What I thought was interesting was a Democratic internal poll from Clarity Campaign Labs only had Spanberger up by 10, which is about the margin that Joe Biden won Virginia by in 2020. We also got, some other polls from some other firms that have showed kind of a wider range of things. VCU, Coefficient, and Qantas all show a race in the mid-single digits. Kaplan had a better result for Spanberger, more similar to the one released by this Democratic PAC. And then what we saw was interesting was Trafalgar, which is a more Republican-leaning poll, only showed Spanberger up by a little over 2% against Earl Sears. Now, Trafalgar obviously is a poll that I've criticized in the past, mostly because the results are pretty consistently skewed right of the actual result. Even in 2024, which was across the board a really good year for Republicans, they put out a lot of polls that actually underestimated Democratic support. In 2024, that really shouldn't have happened just based on the actual electorate. And in 2022, I was very critical of them because they were putting out results that showed Republicans competitive in Washington and Vermont when those things were never really going to materialize. So, not my favorite pollster, but nonetheless, you always keep it in the average. And then, it was in some other pollsters. The last Republican internal poll was from Signal 3 weeks ago, had Spanberger up by 4. But overall, we have a range of results, but the average is around an 8 to 9 point margin of victory for Spanberger, maybe a little less than that. So not a huge outlier. It's not like she's up by 20 in this poll, but this is one of her best polls. And as you can see, this is the highest she's been since a WAPO poll from late September. So in nearly 3.5 weeks, she hasn't hit 55. She's back up there in the State Navigate poll. And Earl Sears is down to 42. She's been in the low to mid 40s, but this is not a great result for her overall. Obviously, as you can tell, as she's down by a pretty significant amount, isn't really close to making this race competitive. Now, in the race for Lieutenant Governor, Ghazala Hashmi against John Reed. This is a race that a lot of people kind of initially anticipated would be the worst for Republicans, just because John Reed is probably their least well-known candidate for these three races. Their candidate for governor, is the current lieutenant governor. They have an incumbent in the race for attorney general and Jason Miyares, but their candidate in the race for lieutenant governor, John Reed, is not really, someone who's super well-known, whereas Democrats nominated Ghazala Hashmi, who's kind of seen as a pretty solid candidate. So overall, I mean, this is a race that I think is going to be pretty similar to the race for governor, right? I'd be pretty shocked if Republicans held on to it or really super close to holding it, just because they've been down by so much in the polling data, and because Republicans don't really have a lot of energy here. They're obviously pouring all their energy into the race for attorney general, which I'll talk about in a second here. And there's a little bit in the race for governor, right? Glenn Youngkin a little bit, stumping for Winsome Earl Sears, but for the most part, it's been the race for attorney general. So that's where we're going to go next. And it's where we're going to talk about for the majority of the video, I think, at this point, just because it's so interesting to me, because we are going to have a genuinely competitive race in Virginia this November, within a few weeks. So, yeah, I mean, I'd say these margins for Spanberger and Ghazala Hashmi are pretty solid. I mean, they're both in the double digits. They're both outperforming Biden in 2020. I think these would be pretty good results for them. I'm probably a bit more bearish on Spanberger, especially. I don't think she's going to win by 13. But this is a poll that's suggesting just that. So that's why I find it so significant. Now, what's interesting here is obviously that number right here with Jay Jones up by 5 and at half the vote. So to me, I think this is going to be really hard to predict, which is unfortunate because this is kind of my job, right? But what I would say right now is that the ticket split that I'm expecting between Abigail Spanberger and between Jay Jones is about 10%. I think that Jones is going to run a solid 10 points behind Spanberger, and I know a lot of people think it's going to be more. I think some people think Spanberger is going to win by like 12 and that Jones is going to lose by 3, right? There's a lot of people who really believe in the ticket split, but also people who think it's only going to be a 5-point ticket split, that as long as Spanberger wins by like more than 6, Jay Jones should probably win. I'm in the middle. I think it's going to be maybe a little bigger than some people expect, but nonetheless, I think that if Spanberger is winning by 13, Jay Jones is also probably winning, maybe not by 5, maybe by 2 or 3 or 4. And so what this poll is suggesting is that Spanberger's running 8% ahead of Jay Jones. I don't find that to be a great number for them because, first of all, I think Jay Jones might lose this race, right? So if Jones loses by a point, that means Spanberger's only up by 7. Spanberger plus 7 result would not be that good for the Democratic Party. It would be only 1% better than the 2024 election, which is really not, was not a great result for Democrats in general. So I think that 8% number, it's going to be more to me. And I would expect Spanberger right now, if you made me make a guess, I think she wins by 9 or 10, maybe closer to 10. I don't think she'll win by 13, but I think it's going to be a 10-point margin there. And that 10-point delta that I just said makes the race for Attorney General a pure toss-up. So that's my current prediction, which is that Spanberger will win by 10. The race for AG is a pure toss-up, and you're going to have to wait until early November to hear my official prediction on that, right? Just because I want to see more data on polling. But this poll is significant because it shows not only that Jay Jones is only 8% behind Spanberger instead of 10, but that he's up by 5, right? This poll suggests that Jay Jones is already at half the vote, so that he'd win, and that he's outside the margin of error. And that's, other polls we've had more recently have shown basically a tied race between Jay Jones and Jason Miyares. And when you talk about off-year elections, I think you have to consider that there are a lot of people who are going to ticket split. I know in 2021 there was not a lot of ticket splitting. In 2021, the big thing was that Republicans won every race by between 1 and 2 points. There was very little ticket splitting in 2021. But what we've seen is that in these off-year elections, without the kind of polarized presidential turnout, you get more affluent, nonpartisan voters, especially in the suburbs, who have maybe voted for Romney in 2012, maybe voted for Biden in 2020, kind of split between Harris and Trump in 2024. A lot of those voters like to ticket split. And that was why in 2021, I think Glenn Youngkin won, because those ticket splitting voters, they turned out at a relatively high rate, right? As we know, the suburbs in off-year elections drop off by less in turnout than rural or urban areas. And that's why Youngkin won, because he did a lot better in the affluent towns outside of, D.C. in Northern Virginia, as well as Richmond, than Trump did the previous year. And so fast forward to 2025, I think Spanberger is going to do pretty well there. She's up in most polls. That indicates that she's probably doing a lot better than Terry McAuliffe did in those areas. She's up by more than Kamala Harris in the majority of surveys as well. That she might do better than Kamala Harris there. But the question is, are they going to ticket split for Jason Miyares? And I think that a lot of them are, because these are voters who, again, aren't super partisan, right? Some of them voted for Harris, some of them voted for Trump, but they switch back and forth. I think candidate quality has proven to be a bigger issue than people often assume it's going to be, right? In 2024, think of, ticket splitting, right? John Tester outran Kamala Harris by 13 points in Montana. He was an incumbent senator. I recognize that. And, he didn't win re-election or come that close, but he did 13 points better than Kamala Harris. And he didn't have a super weak opponent. Tim Sheehy was a fine, I'd say, a replacement level candidate who didn't really have a ton of major baggage that was relevant to the race by November. And so that was a 13-point ticket split. In Nebraska, I think Kamala Harris lost by about 22 points. Dan Osborne only lost by 7, maybe even less, I think 6.5 maybe. So that's another, 15 to 16-point ticket split. And so ticket splitting with the right candidate, it will happen. And so Democrats, I don't know if Jason Miyares is like, seen as being the quote unquote right candidate for Republicans. But I do think that Jay Jones has a lot of baggage that's really, really represented in the polls. So this one survey shows him 8 points behind Spanberger. I've seen polls where he's 10 points behind Spanberger. And so when you look at that delta, it makes it really hard to feel confident that he's going to win this race, just because there are so many voters in Virginia, especially in these areas that are pretty affluent, that have been, really swingy recently, right? And like swingy areas will take it split more, right? Think of Loudoun County, which is super left trending for a decade, then swung towards Trump by 9% last year. There are voters who are, who will switch back and forth between parties. I think those voters, even if a lot of them come out for Abigail Spanberger, are not maybe not going to come out for Jay Jones in the same way. And so those are just my thoughts. The poll shows something a little different. It shows Jay Jones is up by 5, while Spanberger is up by 13. And that would obviously be a good result for Democrats. But, I'm surprised by this poll. That's why I'm saying this. I think this poll is at least contrary to my kind of outlook on this race. It's more generous to Democrats in terms of margin, right? Like Spanberger, her win here is a little beefier than I expect it to be. And it also shows Jay Jones running behind Spanberger by less than you'd expect, and that he's winning, which I'm not sure I would predict right now. I want more polls, like I said. So I just want to update you on this. I think this is probably one of the most surprising polls we've gotten in Virginia this year. And it's one that's very good for Democrats. So please do let me know what you think. And I'll make a video probably talking about the race for Attorney General very soon, just to zoom in and explain why I think this race is going to be so close in more detail. So again, thanks for watching. I'll see you all next time.